Okay, and we're recording. Here with my brother, JP. I am Zach, and we thought it might be fun to do a little podcast, a little brothers podcast, um, for a variety of reasons. But one thing I was thinking about, not the least of which, is just a chance to communicate more,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
even though we're brothers, we live, far away from each other, and we're not necessarily talking all the time. So I don't know. I think it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I think sounds like we have a lot of topics that we think about individually, like the same topics or similar lines of thought. So be nice to kind of compare views and you know flush out ideas and plus, yeah, like you said, just have a chance to talk a little more.
Yeah, it's I feel like I don't really I have a lot of thoughts about sometimes complex topics, whether it be current events or politics or philosophy. Um, but I don't really engage in a lot of discourse around them for various reasons. One of which is that it can be hard to have a meaningful conversation that doesn't sort of devolve into a shouting match or people getting angry. And I can be, as bad of an offender as anybody, which is why I think having a more formalized format kind of, I don't know, in a way makes you hold yourself accountable, have a productive conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, we have a bit of a different focus with this type of interaction versus a lot of times when we get together with our siblings, we end up kind of just joking around and we don't really like dig deep uh,
Yeah.
into like ideas or perspectives or
And
whatever.
it can be hard to even want to do those things because I mean, broaching a difficult topic or a complex idea you might want to pull that thread for an hour or more, and maybe you're not ready to have that conversation, or somebody else doesn't want to have that conversation, and I don't know, it can kind of leave you wanting. But anyway, so we thought an interesting starting point would be to talk about kind of how do you know what you know? What underpins your knowledge base, I suppose. And considering this idea makes me think, well, there's sort of like the formal education route, like what were you taught? Um, at least for me, I I don't know how you feel about this, but I think we had a probably an above average primary education, pre collegiate. But I didn't really enjoy school, and I never really I don't know, it never really interested me, even though I do love learning. And so for me, it's almost like a philosophy question. Like, are you willing to explore difficult ideas that challenge what you know, and being open to maybe changing your views? Um, and that can also apply to school. Just because what you're taught in school, when we were coming up, butter was bad and margarine was good, and now it's the exact opposite. Same with eggs, and it's things are constantly changing and evolving. So
Yeah,
I feel like to contend with those issues can be difficult, but you have
yeah,
to be willing to change your mind on things.
yeah, yeah. I think I know there's great quotes on the idea of like strong convictions loosely held, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't remember, but the idea is always being open to changing your mind in the face of new information, and you can kind of think of that as as like what's the scientific method is based on. Like you have a hypothesis or a theory or a view or whatever, and uh, it will get tested against either formalized experiments or just about life in general.
Yeah,
Sorry for all the coughing.
no worries.
Um, but yeah, just being open to modifying your views when you have new information or new perspective, when it seems like evidence fits a different story
Mm.
better than your current story. So, and then I know that kind of, I'm not a expert on philosophy, but there are fields of thought where you kind of uh, you don't take anything for granted. Like I want to say the Socratic method is part of that. Like you're always questioning things and questioning how you know what you know,
Sure.
and how you know what you know what you know. And yeah, I mean, what can you know really is, I mean, what is the Descartes uh, quote? Like, I think, therefore I am. Like,
Yeah.
all you really have is your direct experience, and then uh, you can use deduction.
Deductive reasoning techniques.
Yeah, yeah, you got deduction and induction, and there's like logical steps that you can, like, self-evident logical steps that you can use to extend your knowledge from your direct experience. But
But so why is that so difficult though? I mean, I mean, if you just look around the either political landscape or um, certainly in this country, we're very divided in a large number of ways. It seems to me that regardless of where you find yourself on the political spectrum, you should be willing to contend with new ideas, challenge them, of course, but not be so beholden to what you're thinking or believing that you know that you're right. There's a psychological concept called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is sort of states that somebody who gains a basic level of proficiency in something sort of assumes that they're a master, right? And so you're more willing to, I guess, suggest that you know what you're talking about when you really don't. Um, and I don't know. I see that all the time. I'm even a victim of it. I mean, I especially in the workplace with programming. Programming's such a great parallel to life in a lot of ways because there's the opposite side of that, which is the imposter syndrome, whereas you actually do know what you're talking about, but you feel like you don't know. So I don't know if it's like a pride thing. Maybe it's just the human condition where you don't want to be wrong. Certainly, somebody who's believed something their entire life, I mean, it's not necessarily an easy proposition for them to suddenly do a 180 on their ideas and consider what they've been thinking and believing is wrong. I don't know. Maybe that comes into play. What do you think?
yeah, I think maybe part of it too is there can be different motivations uh, for holding beliefs. Like, I mean, probably you and I are similar in that we're constantly seeking truth, and we're open to changing our minds in the face of better arguments,
Hmm.
views that seem more aligned with what's true or what's actual, you know, what's actually happening,
Right.
versus like holding beliefs for emotional reasons, like and then you're, instead of seeking out truth, you're more uh, seeking out like evidence that confirms your existing view.
Sure. You're looking. Confirmation bias is extremely powerful. Yeah. I mean, it's to me, and this has so many parallels in so many different areas of life, but um, to me, this is also why some of the principles, certainly of this country, like free speech, are so important. Even speech that somebody might view as dangerous or disrespectful or whatever. I mean, if you don't have that paradigm in place, all new ideas typically come off as radical from some point of view, and it's only through being able to thoughtfully consider maybe a radical idea that you can sort through, I guess, the truth, right? And make progress both on an individual level, but also on a cultural, on a human level, on a technological level. And I suppose that's why when I see things in modern day culture or media related to silencing speech or suppressing speech, really in any form, I kind of don't feel good about it. Even though maybe at face value it seems so obvious that what this person is saying is wrong or hateful or whatever, and I might agree with you, but it seems to me that it sets a really dangerous precedent to start removing speech from society.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I feel like when we were growing up, everyone still just kind of took as gospel the value of free speech and protecting free speech, even when it's a viewpoint that you don't agree with. I mean, like growing up, and every once in a while, there's like a neo-Nazi rally or something, and even I think it was like the ACLU or whoever would stand up for their right to demonstrate in free speech, even
Right.
though it was like an abhorrent viewpoint. And somewhere along the way, it seems to have shifted to where maybe it's just there's less trust in the masses, like regular people's ability to discern truth from disinformation, um, or to be hoodwinked or whatever. But it seems like there's more of a consensus around limiting speech in order to protect the greater good, which
Yeah,
would be
which
a slippery slope, right?
it's a real
Because how can
brave
you
new world
determine?
concept. I mean,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
who knows what is good? I don't know. It's troubling. It's very troubling to me, especially and I don't. I think technology plays a role here because I mean, if you think 50 years ago, maybe free speech was more endowed in society. I don't know, but you could get on a street corner and start saying ridiculous things, but your reach was very limited. Whereas now you can, record a video or write a post, and you can easily interface with people all over the world in the millions if you have that kind of following. So I can see that side of it, but it seems to me that the downsides of limiting free speech far outweigh um, sorry, the positives of limiting free speech far outweigh the negatives, or the other way around. If you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater in this case, and an example of that, to maybe I'll bring in just a couple current events, but regardless of what you think about the past couple of years with COVID-19 and the pandemic, if you got on any kind of platform a year and a half ago and just suggested that COVID-19 may have been leaked from a lab in China, you would be removed from social media. Facebook would remove you. YouTube would not allow that content. It was too radical. It was a conspiracy theory. And then you fast forward a year, and I'm not saying that it did or it didn't happen. I mean, it's still in contention, but it's now a perfectly accepted theory that maybe it did happen. And so, well, why would you silence that to begin with? In the name of trying to do good in the world, because Facebook is the central arbiter of what you can and cannot say. That doesn't jive with me.
yeah. It's that's a good point. Like technology has definitely changed, communication and the ability to reach a large audience. Now, there's not really any gatekeepers anymore. So, I mean, in that sense, we're kind of in uncharted territory. Like, what are the effects on society when anybody can say anything and reach everyone potentially?
Hmm.
Um, and then, what are the effects or the risks to society when you can have malicious actors spewing disinformation in order to, you know, further whatever specific agenda they have? That's
which
not really,
which certainly exists. That certainly
yeah,
happens.
yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think, I mean, and maybe this is just like an emotional attachment or emotionally held belief, but I always tend to default towards freedom. Like, you know, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of dictating how others what others can and can't do, or
Hmm.
unless they're hurting somebody, But maybe you could argue that malicious actors being able to speak freely, it can hurt others. I don't know. I tend to lean towards less restrictions rather than more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a trend these days that conflates speech with violence. Is that
Yeah, yeah,
you are committing an act of violence against me by saying speech that I don't agree with, which is to me very fundamentally different from what the purpose of speech is. There's a very distinct difference between speech and violence. Uh, but it's crazy times. I mean, crazy things happen these days.
yeah.
Um,
I think the discomfort from hearing something you don't want to hear, like that emotional discomfort, maybe you could describe that as violence in one way, but I think that's a qualitatively different form of discomfort than you would feel like from physical violence, like
right.
being suffocated, not being able to breathe or something, or having like a physical injury where you're in extreme pain. Like that seems more like what I would think of as violence versus hearing something you don't want to hear.
Sure.
But I mean, unpleasant either way.
Right. Um, yeah. So I mean, you posed earlier. What is the answer? I don't know that I have the answer either. And I think that is really where interesting discussions can emerge from when there is no perfect answer. So often in life, in politics especially, there isn't a perfect answer. There's always a trade off, and
Right.
so it's always to me it's about doing a cost benefit analysis type of thing and trying to figure out, well, which of these bad options is the best one. And to
Right.
me, you know, the only end that I routinely come up on is the only answer is just more speech. You let all those different ideas contend, and regardless of how stupid or conspiratorial they seem, uh, I mean, who's the judge of that anyway, right? And then let the best ideas win. It's the market of ideas, um, which to me makes sense because we should not want to intentionally stifle ourselves either emotionally or technologically or in any way in society when there's a better idea out there. There's a better way to do it. And I suppose this also sort of transitions into sort of economics and I guess how I approach that, which sort of is, if you're entrepreneurial minded and you want to start a business or you have an idea and you think it's better, I want you to get out there and take your shot. I want to empower you from a society point of view to do whatever you can do. And most people do that end up failing. It's very hard to start a business, especially to be successful. But man, I don't like I certainly don't want to be the one to tell you you can't do that or you shouldn't do that. I want you to get out there and give it a shot. And maybe you move the needle in some direction even if you fail, and maybe that uh, impacts society at large. And that's how progress is made.
Yeah. I think there might be an analogy there too with like uh, endeavors, like business endeavors, or being industrious, like doing some sort of physical action or whatever, trying to produce value, and the intent behind it. And so, like an entrepreneur, you're thinking of somebody that's engaging with the system, like playing by the rules, or like seeking to change the rules for the benefit, for some like real benefit, like producing a good or service, maybe a new good or service, or more efficiently, or somehow better, but has a benefit for society.
Hmm. Yeah.
And uh, maybe the same thing with speech, like when the intent is to like honestly articulate a point of view, and like have a conversation, like a real conversation about it, versus like bot farms from Russia that are trying to increase polarization or whatever. Like So
Yeah.
there's different intents, I guess. So maybe you could have some a justification for moderation based on like the actor's intent, but I don't know. I mean, still like that provides a lot of centralized power, and that has risks for it too. So
Yeah. I mean, there's the old axiom that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't. I'm very wary of too much centralized power, too much authoritarian control, even when it's done in, you know, with good intentions, I suppose. Which I think, and we haven't really talked too much about like where we are politically, but I definitely have a conservative bend, especially when it comes to fiscal policy. And a general critique of democratic policies to me is that they feel good. They seem to be doing good things. Of course, you don't want um, people dying in the street, so of course we have to help people. Like that's a feel like you no one disagrees with that, even conservatives, even hardcore conservatives. And so to me, it's again, it's often a choice between two bad things, and you have to think about what the actual outcome is. And I'm very wary of just throwing a bunch of government money and power at a situation, increasing the scope of government, and just hoping for the best. And I think history is, especially in this country, littered with examples where that just has not worked, but they become good talking points. A great example is both the war on poverty and the war on drugs. Both of those are, I mean, in some level, both of them are more or less failed policies, but they feel good. Of course, you don't want anyone to be poor or in poverty and suffer. Of course, you want to help them. The question is, how do you help them? And
right,
and since the Great Society was introduced, I mean, we're talking about over 50 years ago. I mean, the rate of poverty has not significantly declined enough to where I think somebody looking at that policy when it was considered would be happy with the outcome. But it's such a and even I think even those comments I just said are probably very controversial to a number of people, and I'm not suggesting that what I'm saying is true or without fault, but these are the kinds of things that I think about and look at and question when new government policies come along. Are these actually policies that are going to have the intended effect? Are they going to help the people they're trying to help?
right. Yeah, and I think there's something with like the inertia that is created by institutions, like or bureaucracy in the case of government, and like budgets. There's always a push to increase budgets. There's
Right.
always a push to increase spending, um, and like I guess to broadly capture that idea is I think it was I have the book. Um, Carol Quigley
Hmm.
is a author. He wrote Tragedy and Hope. Um, I think he wrote The Evolution of Civilizations, among other things, like a Georgetown professor from his active up until the 60s or something. But um, he had a quote, something along the lines of instruments become institutions,
Hmm.
where um, some sort of organization is formed to fulfill a particular need in society. And that could be like a company that is, I don't know, creating mobile phones.
Something in
And
the
then
private sector.
it could be something in the public sector. The army is created to provide defense,
Hmm.
and then over time, those instruments kind of evolve into institutions. And the big difference there is institutions in this framework start having their own self-interests. So, like the army wants more money so they can continue to grow, or
Right.
that phone maker starts bending regulatory policy so that it can outcompete competitors, maybe to become monopoly or whatever. So instruments become institutions, and then once they become institutions, they're less effectively fulfilling their original purpose. They become less efficient, or they have a corrupting influence, or their value to society uh, is, I don't know if it's declining or if it's just not as effective as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happens, you can either reform the institution so it's more like an instrument again. So you regulate it or strip it down or modify it, or you somehow reduce that drive towards self-interest that conflicts with its original purpose.
Would an example of that be like the antitrust legislation, like breaking up big oil and breaking up AT&T?
Um, I think I forget which is which. So there's reform within the institution itself. There's reaction, which is uh, like that. I think that's like working outside of the institutional boundaries, and maybe I don't know. I have to look this up. And so anyway, there's reform, reaction, and revolution. And revolution is where like you're changing the entire structure that society is operating under for that, at least with respect to that particular instrument or institution.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the point is like you have some organization with a specific purpose, it's fulfilling that, and then over time it kind of evolves into uh, having its own interests for the good of the organization itself, as opposed to for the good of fulfilling its original purpose.
Yeah, that's interesting because what that's making me think of is I think, pretty salient critique of capitalism, which is, you sort of, when profit is the only motive, you sort of, this is the inevitability, is you just have a few big corporations, which I can see that side, and I sort of agree with it. There's another old sort of saying that the enemy to capitalism is capitalists, because and the thought there is, if you're looking for every advantage trying to grow your company, it's very easy to wander into the political realm. Like, well, can I buy a senator, and then can I force him to create some kind of terms that are favorable for me and less favorable for my competition? And if so, then I mean, it seems like a logical step, regardless of the morality of it. But when that happens, you are sort of destroying the capitalist process.
Right.
You're removing competition in an unfair way. So there's that dichotomy that regardless of what you think about capitalism, sometimes the people who do the most harm to it are those capitalists, like, in charge of those institutions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and I think that's why it's things like that where I wouldn't consider myself hardcore conservative about that stuff, because I think there is a role for regulation to play. I don't think there should be no regulation ever. I do think there should probably be a lighter touch from the government when considering regulation, but I mean, there are some, if you go too far off that cliff, there are people who literally want anarchy, like no government. And
Right.
I think that's very clearly not the right path. I think there is a role for government. The question is, what is the role, right?
Yeah.
To what
Yeah.
extent do they get involved in the economy, or in you know protecting citizens, protecting speech? Where do you draw that line? So those are always interesting discussions to me.
I think it's also tough because we like when thinking about policies, and especially like on a national level or whatever, there's a tendency for like a one size fits all, you know.
Mm,
But people are so different, um, and and it seems like different political ideologies make assumptions about how people are, or how people should be, or how they could be. So depending on like how you are would affect what you believe people are or could be or should be. So that could affect your view too. So
Sure.
maybe that just comes down to values, like
Maybe.
politics, like where you are on the politically is more reflection of your values or your beliefs about what's important or you know whose responsibility is what. I don't know.
And that's interesting because for better or for worse, if you go back to, the Constitution, the founding of this country, it's very clear that the duties of the federal government are outlined in the Constitution. That is what they are responsible for. And then the part that comes after that is mostly missed, I think, is that everything else doesn't mean that it's up in the air, but it's relegated to the states.
Right.
Every state has its own government. Every state is more or less autonomous from the other states, and they can decide for themselves. And that's the framework of government that was set up. Um, but it's very easy and I think tempting, especially these days, to want to kind of legislate from the top. Well, why can't we just mandate at the federal level these laws so that everybody has to comply? And I don't know. I mean, to your point, it feels, depending on what you're talking about, it feels very dangerous to me because the experience of somebody in Mississippi is very different than somebody who lives in New York City. I mean, I don't know that you necessarily need to paint them with a broad brush, especially when it comes to economics. Uh, and so I'm kind of okay with states figuring out those things for themselves. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but uh, it's hard for me to watch the federal government, what I see, continually overstep their bounds and continue to grow. Honestly, the size of the government, because the government never goes the other direction. Like sort of
Right.
once it's there, it's there. Kind of to your
Yeah.
point about reforming and revolution and changing those dynamics. That doesn't happen very much at the federal level, especially. Once
Yeah.
it's there, it's kind of there, and it only gets bigger.
When I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on political parties or the movements, but I want to say the Tea Party movement from like 10 years ago or whatever it was about limiting the size of government. Like that was kind of their big thing, right? Or maybe one of them.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's in general, it's become a conservative talking point these days. Is that
yeah,
this advocating for smaller government? I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a conservative talking point. And well, anyway, I'll let you continue your thought.
Oh, I mean, I think I definitely see the value in like a more decentralized approach to policy, like development and implementation. And then, and I don't have any answers, but and I definitely feel like it's wise to defer to the principles the country was founded on
Right, in general.
in general, yeah. But also to recognize like that was a largely agrarian society like before mass urbanization and all the technology and communication possibilities that are in today's world, as well as like the threat of nukes and like the role, the global order and the role that the U.S. has kind of
Assumed.
found
Yeah,
itself in
yeah,
internationally, and the consequences of maintaining that or withdrawing from that, or however whatever it ends up happening. So it's kind of tough. Like you want to push down policy making, uh, like again, like reserve freedom to the max.
right.
So decentralize as much as you can to the states or localities or to the individual. But then maybe there's some things that need to be coordinated on a national level, and they weren't envisioned originally. When the country was founded, having to do, especially with like national security and the ability to for the U.S. economy to compete effectively on the international stage, or to be able to defend itself from foreign aggression,
Right.
to even minimize the chance that a foreign power grows to the point where it could become like an existential threat to the U.S.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different factors, and that's what makes it kind of difficult to try to come down on any one side or another. But it does seem like a safe bet is always to keep, the principle of maximizing freedom in mind.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, and just like you said, I don't have the answers either. I just think it's valuable to work through these points. I hope no one would take what I say as that I'm suggesting that this is the only answer. But it's good to consider ideas. And to your point about national security and sort of the role of this country on the world stage, it's there's a lot of different elements there. It, another common critique I think of America, um, is that there's a movie from the early 2000s by the South Park creators called Team America World Police, right? This is the
Love that movie.
fantastic movie about, but it's satire, but there's obviously an element of truth of that America has sort of become the cops of the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's true to a certain extent. Um, I think it's something. So the defense budget is an often cited area for like why are we spending so much money, valuable resources on what people see as um, being like an expansionist nation, colonialism, nation building. One point that I've heard recently about this is that if America is trying to be a colonial power, at least these days, they're doing a really poor job of it. We just exited Afghanistan. We've exited almost everywhere in the Middle East. And I mean, we tried to rebuild Iraq. We put a system of government in place, but it didn't work. So I think there's a lot of criticism you can levy over a historical context at both America, but really any Western power. I mean, Portugal, and England, and all of these nations that sort of tried to settle the globe. But to me, the question is, especially not right now with like Russia invading Ukraine, like, do you really want to shrink the military strength of the country? I don't know. And I think I had brought this point up to you. Let me just bring this up actually. Like an interesting stat to look at is the number of aircraft carriers by country worldwide. Let me transition this. This is just from Wikipedia. It's the number of in-service aircraft carriers by country. The United States has 11. The next closest is China with 2.
Yeah.
So consider this. If you're, I don't know, Denmark, Sweden, any country that Americans like to idolize, Scandinavian, European countries in general, they say, well, they have universal health care. We don't. They're doing everything right. This is going to be controversial, but on a very real level, their national defense is being subsidized by the United States. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And so now, like, when Ukraine is being invaded by Russia and there's political pressure on the United States to intervene, why isn't there political pressure on Nicaragua to intervene? Or Liechtenstein. Well, the reason is because they have functionally no military power at the world stage level. And so America has sort of filled this role of the de facto peacekeepers, even though there's obviously been horrible things done, especially in Latin America, in the name of trying to keep the peace from this country. But, there's all kinds of ways to criticize current defense policy, but at the end of the day, you kind of want to have, like, when push comes to shove and North Korea is going crazy, you want to be in a position of power. So, and this is an area I think I've started to be swayed on more recently, where it's really easy to say that like, well, half the national budget goes to defense, roughly speaking, and that's just huge waste. Well, it's huge waste until some crazy dictator from another country comes into power and invades another country, and then you sort of want to be seen as strong on the world stage. So I don't know. It's a really complex topic, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, and that I mean, I don't know if alone the number of aircraft carriers can do justice to like the relative power of each military power of each country.
Sure.
I would imagine that ours is even higher than like a 2 to 11 ratio or whatever. Um, because you have like yeah, I mean all the other facets of military power, and then you have economic power and uh, political or cultural power.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different dimensions of it. Um, but I mean, certainly, uh, we have like the U.S. is the most powerful country currently and has been for a while. And the current global order is underpinned by that power. And I think the idea is like always been that we spend a lot, invest a lot to create and maintain that, but we also get a lot out of it too. And so it's always been like a favorable balance for us and for the rest of the world in general.
Right.
Like maintaining open trade lanes, promoting, mutual cooperation, economic trade, which reduces the chance of war between nations. So, and again, using that power to ensure that we minimize the chance that another uh, power base develops that will go to threaten us in an existential way. But and then like reserve currency, like the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency,
Right.
the majority one, like by far currently, even if that is slowly changing and may change further in the future. But that provides us with enormous benefits as well, and then there's probably some trade-offs there too. But we can essentially borrow without limit, for
Right.
better or worse. And it also we use that power, military power, to underpin the petrodollar system, where I don't know if it's the majority, it's probably the majority. Like a huge amount of international oil trade is conducted in dollars, which
Right.
increases the value of the dollar because countries need dollars in order to buy oil, so they'll have to acquire those dollars. So that's helping to prop up the value of the dollar and helping to prop up our ability to continue borrowing and creating more debts, dollar denominated debts. So what happens if all that changes? I mean, if yeah, that's kind of a different topic, I guess. But we'd have like probably a change in our international balance of trade, and maybe that'd have some beneficial effects for like domestic production. But yeah, I mean, so we definitely spend a lot on defense. Is that a good or bad thing? I mean, there's certainly tangible benefits that it gives us.
And two things can be true at the same time. I think this is a point that is often missed in modern day conversation. Is you can still that doesn't mean that you can't criticize the defense budget.
Yeah,
Um, the military is well known for being extremely wasteful,
right.
um, and so you can always be looking at ways to do better. There is no perfect, um, I guess, outcome. There's only trade offs. So
Yeah,
and that this also doesn't mean that that is not a limiting factor in why, for instance, the United States can't have universal health care. I mean, maybe it can, but they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, or any other government program um, that I think is that a lot of European nations have, and we could talk about the relative strengths and weaknesses of any of those, but um, it's a very interesting topic, and this also sort of in my mind translates into, I think you hit it on a little bit, surrounding domestic production. Um, like right now, for a long time, it's been policy of the federal government to subsidize corn farmers, with the thought being that even if they're just growing it and throwing it away, you know, uh, in a time of need, you want to have all of that domestic production capacity available.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's like it's a difficult topic. Like to think that my tax dollars are subsidizing somebody to grow corn and then throw it away when they could be doing something else, or we could structure that somewhat differently. Well, I mean, it's hard, but then at the same time, I don't want to, like, from a citizen's point of view, I don't want to be in a situation where international trade lines are cut off and then we have no food.
Right.
So it's obviously a trade-off. Um, and actually, it's an interesting conversation about risk as well. Like, um, you can go buy some cryptocurrency with $100, and there's a chance that in a year it'll be worth $1 million. Like that could happen, but you're missing the risk of what the other side of the coin is. And so thing policies like what I just said with the corn subsidies to me is a way to mitigate risk, even if it seems wasteful. Um, so you could go with like some highly leveraged approach type of thing where you get rid of all the farms domestically because it can be done more efficiently elsewhere and you can just import it. But when that risk hits the fan and you roll the dice and it comes up snake eyes, it's kind of nice to have something to fall back on. Even though if in most circumstances it doesn't seem to make sense. And I think that's in general more of a, well, maybe it's more of a conservative viewpoint. I don't know. Um, there's another sort of saying that compares like a liberal versus conservative approach that says if you come to a fence in the middle of a road, and the liberal viewpoint is to get rid of the fence, doesn't make any sense, there shouldn't be a fence in the road, and the conservative viewpoint is more akin to, well, maybe there's a reason there's a fence in the road, before we remove it maybe we should just check, type of thing. um, I think that sort of paints liberals in a bad light. I don't know that it's necessarily that way, um, but it does hit on some underlying theme for me that it's very easy to have a knee jerk reaction, especially as a younger person. I think that's why you tend to see younger demographics skew towards the left, because, and maybe it even relates back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like you start to get a little bit of knowledge about the world, and you think it's very easy to see everything that's wrong with it, and the solutions are so obvious when it might not be that way. So I don't know. It's the only saving grace I have really is that you just have to discuss it and you have to consider it and you have to challenge your ideas and you have to challenge others. Um, and it's a chaotic process. But I don't really know of any other way to do it. So as long as you can be respectful, I can criticize Democratic policies. I can criticize Republican parties. I don't feel like I identify with the Republican Party, even though I have a number of conservative viewpoints. Um, I think you have to be willing to, uh, criticize any idea, regardless of where it has come from, regardless of what allegiance you feel, um, and just recognize that you don't have all the answers. And the only way we're going to get the answers is by, making an effort and twisting and turning these concepts and seeing what comes out on the other side. And that's sort of how I feel about things like national defense. It's very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of things are complicated when you start looking at broader implications for, whatever the topic is. That's all the more reason to dive into it and to think about it and then return back to it later and think about it more. Um, which, the idea of democracy and, civic engagement, that's kind of everyone's jobs, or
Sure.
there's like a civic duty for that to be able to make informed policy choices, or put your support behind one political philosophy or another, or candidate or whatever. But you mentioned you don't necessarily identify as either of the political parties. I kind of can relate to that. It's like that feeling of being politically homeless, right?
Mm.
Like there's things on one side that make sense, and on the other side that makes sense, and there's I don't really understand either of the parties because they seem to have, within both their platforms, they seem to have internal contradictions, and there's not like a coherent philosophy that I can see. I mean, there's skews, I guess, but it seems like some of it is just historical uh, momentum, or maybe they're just like reading tea leaves of polls or something, and just trying to like modify the platform so that it's appealing to roughly 50% of the people, or like they're trying to gain market share, and so doing that, which I guess is what democracy should be, being responsive to the will of the people.
Right.
But yeah, politics is a weird animal. I think about it a lot, and I look at different ideas and arguments, and yeah, some of them make sense. Some of them, yeah, a lot of them just kind of they conflict with one another. So it's odd seeing like a particular candidate or politician that holds these views that seem to be at like diametric odds to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Like being all about freedom, and then also supporting the war on drugs or whatever.
Sure.
Or being yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of those types of dichotomies.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that from my point of view, because I guess I sort of had this picture in my mind that you were, more on the left, maybe, and maybe I just have created that over time from, I don't know, just thinking or hearing you talk when you're in your 20s. I'm just curious, do you feel like, would you say that you have a more liberal bend? Because it sounds like we probably have a lot of the same ideas on a number of topics, or we would agree on a number of ideas.
Yeah, I think we would, and especially hashing stuff out. I think like we have the same, very similar, like foundational values. So I think if we like,
Well, we did grow up together, so
yeah, and that makes sense, right?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think I used to be more of like a on the left-ish side when I was younger, um, and then I don't know if I'm on the right side now, or yeah, politically homeless is more like I don't really have much love for either of the major parties, but yeah, I just think there's bits and pieces. If anything, I think like what is the phrase? Fiscally conservative and socially liberal.
Yeah.
Maybe? Something like that.
I mean, the one that I don't even know if I agree with this, but the one that I sort of feel like I most closely identify with is what's called classically liberal, like a John Stuart Mill type of liberal, which is really a focus on. I mean, liberalism to me is supposed to be a focus on freedom. A lot of the same points you're talking about, but it doesn't. I think the modern day Democratic Party has strayed from that definition in a substantial way. But yeah, you mentioned the war on drugs. Like, yeah, to me, it's very clear that something like prohibition is an example. If you outlaw something that people want, the only thing that happens is that it drives it underground. You're just creating a black market, and that's true across time and across geography. And it's just what humans do. You see that with sex workers as well, especially in this country. Even though there's a couple places where it's legal, it just drives it underground. So, to me, those are great areas to be like, hey, and we're starting to see some of this change with recent, legislation surrounding marijuana.
Sure.
why don't if you treat it somewhat similar to alcohol, where the state can capture some amount of tax on it, and you can regulate it, but make it available in a safe way. It seems like a win-win to me. And this already happens with things that are traditionally illegal anyway. There are places that hand out free, clean needles, like in San Francisco, because they would rather have people who are using, heroin on the streets use a clean needle to protect themselves rather than use dirty needles. So you're already sort of sanctioning the activity in that way. I think you could do better, and then obviously the other side benefit to that is you can sort of destabilize the drug cartels in Latin America, and I think that would probably help to stabilize those countries in a sort of indirect way. But yeah, I mean, it's just like you said, erring on the side of freedom, I think, is a good idea. Uh, and by the way, the Republican Party and conservatives in general are also they also have areas where this falls apart. It's not like um, they only want freedom and everything. I mean, there's plenty of examples, I think, throughout history where that's not the case. Um, so yeah, it's to me that classical liberal definition is more about being willing to think about ideas and engage with them and potentially change your mind on things. And to me, it's sort of different than what you would call the modern day libertarian party, which I also don't really, I don't know, identify myself with, even though that's supposed to be more focused on liberty and freedom. And I don't know. It's a complicated topic, and honestly, I don't know that you need to have a label. Like, who really cares at the end of the day? I think that's probably a human condition thing where we want to containerize and categorize things. We want to have a label for it so that it's neat and packaged in our mind. But life is messy. Life is chaotic, and especially when dealing with political views.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, the idea of like trying to choose a side, left
Right.
or right, or hitch your wagon to whatever the saying is. I think the only label really, not to be like overly nationalist, but American, right? Like we're all
Sure.
countrymen, like we have shared interests in that respect. Um, but yeah, I mean, and then being okay, disagreeing with one another,
This,
hashing it out,
yeah,
like
this
in like a
happens.
civil way,
Right.
and not without just name calling. And but a lot of that stuff is what gains traction. People like to feel outraged.
Yeah, it's the clickbait culture, right?
Yeah,
And this is what the news has become. This is why the news is unwatchable for me, is because I recently watched like a news clip from the 1980s, and it's such a stark difference from what we have today. Whereas, why can't you just tell me the facts of what is happening? I don't need you to editorialize or sensationalize the things and tell me what I'm supposed to think about it. Why can't you just tell me what the facts are? I think we've strayed quite far from that. um,
yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed for a while, and maybe it's a little different now. There's different emphasis stuff being emphasized in the news, but even like being able to agree on what the facts are
right.
was for a while. And I mean, I think we see that right now with Russia. You apparently they have a very one-sided, party-dictated media over there, so
Right.
they don't even like the facts that they're getting are entirely different than the facts that we hear about what's going on in Ukraine.
Which
So
is why open information and free speech, freedom of the press, is such a foundational value. I think. Um, I don't know how you structure a successful society without it while still appreciating freedom. Seems
yeah,
difficult to me. And then, so while we were talking about this, it made me think of another example. Just to continue this talk about media a little bit. I, there was a recent story out of Tennessee. I don't know if you caught this one. That Tennessee, the headlines are like Tennessee has banned a book. There's this book called Mouse, which I'm
oh
pretty
yeah, I
sure I
remember
read
that.
it. We
Yeah,
probably
we had
both
that in
read it.
school. Yeah,
It's a
that
graphic novel.
comic book. Yeah,
It's a graphic novel about the Holocaust, told from the perspective of like a mouse family, literally like a mouse. Um, and it's a book written by a gentleman who I believe his father went through the experience of the Holocaust, and it's sort of so there's all kinds of um, storytelling elements to it. Um, and the headlines are that Tennessee has banned this book. And I followed this one a little bit because I had read the book and I was very curious what was going on here. And I'm not kidding when I tell you that really every major news outlet ran the story that Tennessee has specifically banned the book in the school system, and people get really fired up about it. And so I decided to look into it deeper, and it made me sad, honestly, because it's so it's such a distortion of what happened. But this is what people know and think, and even at work, we have like a side chatter channel on our Slack where people just comment about random things going on, and somebody had said, "Oh, didn't Tennessee ban this book?" Because if you don't look into it, you don't know what's going on. So I looked into it as deep as I could to the point of where I found the original agency that reported the story, and they had a link to the meeting minutes from the school board, and it's like 8 or 10 pages of minutes describing this process that led to the school board making this decision. And what actually happened is that the school board decided to remove the book from the required reading list for eighth graders. That's what happened. And whether you agree or disagree, the reasoning was because I don't remember this, but apparently there are some parts of the book that are sexualized in some way. But because the general content of the book is surrounding the Holocaust, the story becomes the state of Tennessee bans this book because they're, I don't know, Holocaust deniers, or they're trying to cover up what happened in the Holocaust. Now maybe you disagree that it shouldn't be removed from the required reading list, but it's even still available in the school library. There's nothing that's banned. It has not been banned in any sense of the word. So, it honestly makes me angry, because to me the role of a journalist is supposed to be to find those facts and bring them to light. And like I said, every major news outlet ran with the story that the book is banned. And then that becomes the narrative, and so that's what people think. And so people all over the country now are assuming that Tennessee is so backwards because they banned a Holocaust book because they're trying to teach kids that the Holocaust didn't happen. I don't know. I don't know what the. So it's frustrating to me.
yeah,
So to me, that's such a prime example of what is wrong with the media, uh, for why you can't actually accurately report the facts of a situation, and let the public discern what they think about it. You're basically telling them what to think. You're crafting that narrative, and to me, this is what Noam Chomsky talks about in manufacturing consent.
yeah,
These media companies literally can brainwash you into believing that you're sort of you consent to this idea, and it's very sad to me that this has become the sort of role of modern mainstream media. And this is not a critique at either party, but it's a critique more at the media, I suppose. Um,
yeah. There's definitely media spin, and yeah, it's a great book. I feel like he has like, or there's a co-author, but they had like five principles or something, had to do with like the journalist's inherent ideology acting as a filter,
mm,
the ownership of the company, advertiser influence. I think there was like one or two other filters there. Yeah, there's a lot of influences, and then I mean I think with digital media and like traditional media having kind of had a tough time because of the rise of digital media, it seems like there's less money or opportunity in journalism, like real journalism, like primary sources, like creating like actually going out and getting the facts.
Right.
And there's a lot more of like, I don't know, fake journalism, but like derivative journalism, where it's just like reporting on stuff that's been reported, or kind of like playing telephone. Stuff gets lost in translation or
Right.
spun in different ways for, you know, get clicks or eyeballs or whatever the case is. Or, you know, it's like a promotional thing where, you know, there's a sponsor, either, you know, even if they're not directly credited with, you know, sponsoring a story, but they're like providing the resources to do it, paying
Sure.
for it or whatever, to promote a particular viewpoint, like you know, like a PR type of campaign or whatever. So definitely lots of influences in what, you know, happens in media, but just a good, you know, perspective to keep in mind. Like, you can't really believe anything that you hear, and you have to
Right.
think for yourself and seek out additional sources or additional, you know, information to confirm or refute it. Just like science, you know.
So
You know,
yeah, it's you got to dig. I've gotten to the point now where if I pull up headlines or like a news source, I just read the headline and I go, "This is probably not true." You know,
yeah,
like I once heard somebody comment like any headline that asks a question, the answer is almost universally no. Because if you ask the question in such a way that sounds ridiculous, of course the answer is no. Like, are we going to blow up the moon? Question mark. Well, no. But like, if you
yeah,
say something ridiculous, you can grab headlines, grab attention, and you're trying. Ultimately, I think they're trying to get that click, right? They're trying to make you click on the story. But that all leads into this whole idea of, you know, not actually reporting the story is just you know, essentially writing garbage, trying to get people to click on your story.
yeah,
So it's tough sledding. Okay. Well, we went for an hour already on that.
yeah. And that was
There's a
just
lot
the
of threads
first.
to pull.
Well, I guess we ended up kind of weaving in some of the other topics that we had in the agenda.
Yeah. I actually, before we transition, we have another topic we want to talk about, but I want to get your take on one other thing, which is this idea of the American dream.
Yeah,
Um, I've been thinking about this a lot recently because there's I think there's a lot of criticism these days that oh the American dream is dead, or you know anything that's negative that comes out of this country is seen as maybe the American dream never even existed, or the only reason that America is successful is through exploiting other people or other cultures or countries or whatever. To me, the idea of the American dream sort of transcends um, time in a way. If you look through the sort of founding of the country and what America was supposed to be, um, I think the American dream these days has sort of people associate it with, well, if I you know get a job, then that means I'm going to be able to buy a house one day. That means I'm going to be have X, Y, and Z possessions, and the American dream is dead for me because I can't do that because real estate prices are rising because of my wages aren't going up enough because I have student loan debt. So the American dream doesn't apply to me or it's dead. Um, I just wanted to get your take on. Do you have any thoughts about what the American dream is and if it exists at all?
yeah. That's a good topic. Um, I mean, it seems like even the idea of like attaching it to a particular nation is a little bit too limiting, right? Because it's, you know, the American dream, but it was founded, you know, it was from the founding documents of the country, which was during the Enlightenment era. So there's a lot of Enlightenment era principles that are kind of enshrined in there, which, as far as I understand, is like, you know, the value of the individual, the value of rationality, and you know, progress. Like, there's some inherent like progress idea in there. So the idea that, you know, you can be empowered uh, to grow. You know, you have the freedom to choose what you want to focus on. And then there's like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So, like you have basic property rights, physical uh, uh, safety, at least to the extent that like there are walls against aggression and whatnot. Um, and sort of like the contract is you have the foundation in place that enables you to go on out in life and like pursue what is meaningful to you, like
Mm.
what makes you happy or what you find meaningful to invest your time in. And again, like that was sort of the ideal, right? Like coming out from under tyranny and having freedom and like this focus on the individual. And it's been an imperfect implementation ever since it was first declared. But that's kind of enshrined in that is there's an ever evolving realization of that potential.
Yeah.
Even if we'll never get there, like we're always striving and making, trying to make trying to make progress and more fully realizing that.
Yeah. I definitely agree. To me, the American dream, and I think I don't know that it's exclusive to this country anymore, but certainly the ideas that came out of the Enlightenment and the founding of this country, I think, are applicable. And if you look, if you move the dial back a few hundred years, before all this stuff happened. So just like we talked about earlier, there is no perfect solution, but look at the alternative. I mean, do you want to live in a feudal state where you have serfs and you're like there is no it doesn't matter how hard you work, right? It doesn't like there's you're not gonna be able to achieve anything outside of your class essentially. And to me, that is sort of what you have to juxtapose against the American dream, and which is we don't have this dynamic anymore where there's a monarchy or some sort of overlord over you, at least in the West, modern Western nations, and that when this country really started gaining prominence, especially in the early part of the 20th century, you had people pouring in through Ellis Island. Even our own great grandfather came through Ellis Island. And the idea is that they're looking for it's the promise of opportunity. It doesn't guarantee success. There's nothing guaranteed. It doesn't. You could work your entire life 12-hour days and maybe not end up any better than you would have been otherwise. But what it does open up is this idea that you can better yourself. You can better yourself, your life, and especially the life of, say, your children. And so that's why, at least in our family, our great grandfather coming through Ellis Island, I imagine he worked extremely hard, both before he came to this country and after. And there's a direct thread for us to that where we have a better life because of a decision that was made back then and by him trying to work hard. So to me, that's what the sort of American dream is that life is suffering, basically. I mean, the idea that we have all these creature comforts and life is relatively easy for most people in this country, that's not the steady state of the universe, of Mother Nature, right? It's a chaotic, destructive process. And so, yeah, we have a drastically better life because of what our ancestors chose to do and how they tried to work and tried to provide for their family and set their kids up for better success. And so to me, that's what the American dream is. It's the freedom, I suppose, for you to sort of shoot your shot, for you to get out there and put your head down and work hard and try to make something better than what you had before. And like I said, for so much of human history, it just did not exist. You couldn't do that. You were either born into aristocracy or you weren't. And if you weren't, then well, I'm sorry. Your dice roll came up poor, and that's just who you are now. So, and I think you're right. I think the Enlightenment values have a huge play in this. The focus on the individual as opposed to the state, um, and it opens the door. It opens the door for success. Um, doesn't mean everybody's going to get there, but it at least enables you to try. you know, and I think that we call them the greatest generation. People born in the early part of the 20th century, who, in a very real way, lived in a time without all of the benefits that we have now, possibly without electricity, and able to withstand extreme hardships, two world wars and the stock market crash, and living in abject poverty, and being able to come out on the other side of that. So I think that's sort of what it means to me. And I do think it exists. I do think it still exists. I don't think it's about having to have a house with a white picket fence and feeling entitled to that, and being upset that real estate prices are rising and that you'll never be able to get that. That's another complicated topic, but it's an idea. It's the idea that you have merit because you're an individual, and you can sort of strike out into the world and shoot your shot. So I don't know, and like I said, I think this exists in many other countries now. I don't know that it's necessarily uniquely American anymore, although maybe there was a time when it was maybe more close to that. But to me, that's because the success of the West in the past 200 years has sort of painted this pattern to follow, to how to be sort of successful as a nation. And any modern Western nation sort of follows a similar blueprint in terms of focusing on the individual, and granting individual rights and property rights and all that stuff. And you don't necessarily see that in other parts of the world even today that do not have those same systems of government. So I don't know if I made any sense with any of that, but I was dancing around the idea of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, the American promise is sort of the same foundational values that are throughout the West, at least as I understand it. Like, I'm not familiar with every Western country, but the ones I've been to, and the few the few I've been to, and the ones I know a little bit about, they're all kind of have the same core principles. And I think the other thing is, like, maybe it's more like the American dream versus the American promise. American dream sort of has that more materialistic component to it, with, like, to put yourself up and buy the house, and like, get into middle class, and be comfortable, and all that.
Right.
Which, yeah, I mean, that seems to have changed a bit over the past few decades or 100 years even. And that can get into a whole broader context about the U.S. economy and how it's grown, and then how it's changed over the decades, and the forces affecting it, and that into the global order and all that stuff too. But yeah, I mean, as far as like what it means to be an American, or like the principles of the country at the core, seems like that should be pretty self-evident, right? Like, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, I mean, it might be idealistic, but I think they're important values.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, is there any other direction you want to go on any topic related to this, or do you want to?
The only thing like that I was just kind of thinking of is that will probably be a good, like, foundational piece for where we jump off as we continue discussions about, like, what is the proper role of government, or how to decipher whatever current event,
Yeah.
or just like keeping those principles in mind, and um, seeing how they play out in different contexts, and how they can influence, how they have influenced, or how they might influence different policy options and whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah, I think they're really important topics to consider, and it's not just like a one time thing. It's you must be constantly evaluating and reevaluating, in my opinion. Okay, well, we're going to transition, I think, into a second topic that we wanted to discuss, which is not really sure how this is going to go, but today is a unique day in our family, which is April 9th, which is, so it's been 19 years is the amount of time since our father committed suicide in 2003 on April 9th. And so, yeah, we thought it might be appropriate to talk about maybe that event specifically, but also maybe a broader talk about mental health. I know this is something that, well, I think many people in our family have wrestled with mental health in various capacities um, over the years, and I mean, it was obviously a leading factor that related, that caused our dad to end his life. And so, I don't know, where do you want to jump in on this? Do you want to talk about that event and specifically about him, about depression?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could take it. I think the big thing for me is I was thinking about this. I mean, today's the ninth and everything. I was thinking about it this morning. I think like a good way I could describe how it affected me is, maybe this is even too trivial, but like you look, how we think of years in like BC and AD. It's kind of like that.
Hmm.
Like April 9th, 03 was like the point for me. It was like before that date and after that date. Like that's kind of my, like, to summarize my life experience.
Wow.
It was such a pivotal uh, like event,
Yeah.
and it happened when I was 18, just starting out adulthood, and it just kind of like that was the end of childhood, I guess. Like, and that was the beginning of me uh, having to source my own discipline and sense of responsibility, like myself.
Hmm. That's an interesting way to
'Cause-
put it. Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, Dad, like he he had very like concrete values, and he was the disciplinarian too, right? So a lot of my self discipline at that point was externally motivated. Like, didn't want to get on his bad side, and
Yeah.
didn't want to let him down and stuff too. And like the sense of responsibility was kind of emulating the responsibility that he projected and that he demanded. Sorry, I missed the mute on that one.
It's okay.
So yeah, like once he was gone, and the way that he left, I went through a period of where I kind of turned my back on those values for a while, and so I had to, even though like I grew up with them, I knew what they were. I could sense like they're built into my conscience. I had to rediscover on my own. Like I had to learn the hard way, right? I
Sure.
had to discover the value, or even the necessity of being responsible, and of like living in a disciplined way. And even like, not that I was ever exactly particularly dishonest, but the value of honesty,
Yeah.
uh, and especially the value of hard work.
That the honesty one really resonates with me. I've felt this way for a few years now. I've talked about this with my wife and a few other people that I really and truly actively strive to not tell any lies in day to day life. It doesn't mean that I always live up to that. I mean, certainly, but it's like a conscious effort for me. And I think there's a variety of benefits from that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the values that I think I champion today or resonate with today, I do see in a very real way them originating from our father. Even though, like you at the time, especially growing up as a kid, I don't know that I ever would have cared about any of that. I think most kids are just trying to get by, just trying to figure out what the world is and how to survive in it. But now that I've sort of gotten a little bit older and being able to reflect upon the world and our experiences, yeah, I mean, you know, our dad was the guy who carried toolboxes in his car and would stop on the side of a road to help a stranger fix his car. And like it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's the idea that you want to help your fellow man, somebody you never met.
Although I mean, and that is true, but we should also point out that he insisted on buying beat up old 1980s minivans, so you often need that toolbox in order to make the car work, so
Absolutely.
make it back to the house.
Absolutely. Part of the charm, I suppose. Um, yeah, it's tough. I mean, even now, I see a therapist like every week, and we talk about this idea and others. But like at least for me, I had no idea up until the point that he died. I had no clue that he struggled with depression or that there was any kind of issue going on, or I don't know that I had any kind of solid understanding of his childhood or sort of what he had been through. So it was extremely shocking to me. Um, and then obviously I learned about more of that as time went on. But I think if I remember correctly, you had maybe a little more insight. You were obviously a couple of years older than me, so I was 16 at the time. And how much did you know or comprehend what his internal demons and struggles were?
I never really got a view into what exactly he was so upset about. Um, and I know, like, I want to say some of his friends like have said back, after all that happened, like, come talk to me when you're 30 and give me some more background, which I haven't done yet. I'm more than 30, so maybe I should do that. But because it would be nice to know, like, have a better idea of what it was. But it wasn't. It's like a surprise that he did it, but not fully surprised that that was on the table, and that was because I had seen him. He had threatened that the year prior or something, and Mom took me with her to go, see what, find them and like, figure it out. I think she was afraid to go alone. I was the oldest, so she took me. So yeah, it wasn't. It didn't come entirely out of left field, but excuse me. Yeah, for me, it was just like the after effects is what I hadn't. I mean, I didn't think of it as a possibility, but then once it happened, I didn't realize how much how influential it was going to be on me for a long time.
Yeah.
Like it took at least a decade to kind of fully process, more than a decade to fully process that whole thing, and to be able to like sit and talk about it without breaking down.
I was going to say something similar, actually, is I feel like in the immediate aftermath, say the first 5 years, it almost just feels like a blur in my memory in a lot of ways. Like, I certainly don't feel like I was contending with the maybe emotional consequences of that event, more of just sort of, I don't know, pretending it didn't happen or ignoring it. I don't know. But yeah, I've almost felt like in recent years, like maybe within the past 7 or 8 years, that I've been maybe more in tune with it or more willing to engage about it. I don't know. It's sort of weird how, I mean, I think grief hits everyone differently, but um, sort of weird how it's manifested itself when I reflect upon it. Sometimes just like you. I mean, even now, even in present day, I'm still overcome with grief from this event from time to time. But it at least doesn't. I don't feel like it affects me on a day to day basis, where maybe at some point it used to.
Yeah.
Actually, an interest. I don't know where I saw this, but an interesting description I heard of someone describing grief, and the grieving process was, um, imagine it like you're floating in the ocean, and grief is waves, and or like shortly after the event, it's like the waves are 100 feet tall, and they're just coming one after another. It's just like wiping you out. And then over time, the waves are still 100 feet tall, but maybe they start coming less often, and you still have that 100 foot wave coming and crashing over you and wiping you out, but it doesn't happen as often. And then over more time, um, maybe they come even less frequently, and then eventually maybe the waves start coming, like some of the waves start getting shorter, and so it's both the frequency and the intensity starts dropping off. But then the takeaway for me is that it doesn't really matter how much time has passed. Maybe you haven't seen a wave in a year. Maybe the last wave was only 10 feet tall. That 100 foot wave can always come, at any time. And it's just about trying to.
Yeah, it can come. Happens.
It's just about trying to manage that wave.
Yeah.
Right.
Something interesting is like another thing I didn't foresee is uh, like stepping into the parent role, like with the stepkids, and um, and then you're doing some of the things that you were on the other side of as a kid, right? And so remembering how dad would respond to different situations, or just like different memories, that brought some of those waves for me for a while. Not as much anymore. But, who knows when that'll happen again. But also, like, uh, it gave me a different type of appreciation for like all that him and mom too did, in raising us.
Yeah.
The sacrifices they made, the patience they had, and it's a lot of patience to raise kids, and also like like the stuff you worry about, and like trying to teach them to be responsible, but also not like make it externally driven, but like allow them to kind of figure things out, and develop the it's like that inner wisdom and you direction.
Yeah. Let them
So
try for themselves. Try and
yeah,
fail almost.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
so
It's an interesting reflection on like childhood and the human experience as well. Like how do you most help somebody? And it's I say this to our like when we have a junior programmer on our team, or like in roles where I've been sort of a mentor, is I say, it's okay if you don't come up with the right answer, but you have to go try. You have to
right,
go in there and struggle with this problem. and maybe maybe you come up with the right thing and maybe you don't, and maybe you come back and say, hey, I tried X, Y, and Z and I couldn't figure it out. But that process, it's like a chaotic process almost of struggling through something difficult. It feels very important to me as part
Yeah,
of human development, as part of trying to become like a productive member of society. And it's hard. It's really hard because when you're in a position of power over somebody and they're having a hard time, it's really easy to just give them the right answer type of thing. And I kind of now relate that to. I mean, I'm not a parent, but being a parent and trying to help a child, like how do you actually help them? It's like almost like teach a man to fish instead of giving him a fish.
yeah,
And I think our father very much embodied that idea of you got to get in there and try.
yeah, yeah. Which is kind of is very like talk about it, the dichotomy is all that he like stood for while alive, and then what ended up happening. Which there's got to be more to the story that or what he was experiencing internally, or his perspective, and what led him to do what he did. But while he was alive, it was very much about doing the right thing. Uh, you know, even if it's not the easy thing, and working hard and just treating everyone with respect.
Yeah, I know that you probably know this too, but the phrase that always sticks out to me is I remember him saying, "You can work hard now or work hard later,"
Yeah,
which I think about that a lot actually still because especially when it comes to saving and investing and things like that, it's like you know there's no free lunch. You got the work has to come out at some point, one way or another, um, and so there are actionable things you can do in your life, like right now, to improve your future prospects, to make things easier for yourself down the road. Um, and sometimes those things are not easy or popular or fun to do. Um, but there's also this idea. I don't know that I got this from Dad necessarily, but I've been encountering this idea recently of sort of like hard work is its own reward,
hmm.
um, which is sounds stupid to me. But when I think about it, but the idea that you can kind of work hard for hard work's sake, and that can kind of give you a sense of purpose and meaning in
Yeah,
in the world. And I kind of think that would have been something that Dad would have resonated with in some way.
yeah, yeah. That's an interesting point. I feel like that is. I think I would want to rephrase that as something where so it's not so much for its own sake, but it's for the benefits. It's for the results it produces. And
Mm.
ideally you're putting that effort towards some goal you have.
Sure,
But I don't
making
know. I mean,
progress in a direction. Yeah,
yeah, because I'm thinking of like you could do hard work that ultimately doesn't achieve anything like in the material sense. Like you're digging holes and then filling them back up, and then digging again and filling them back up. But then you're also disciplining your mind. You're overcoming maybe emotional experience where of wanting to give up. You're probably getting stronger from digging all those holes. So there are like benefits from that activity, even if it's not the ostensible one that would be typically be associated with it. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I feel like it's not necessarily for its own sake, but like the benefits it provides. Maybe it, I don't know, inherent benefits of its, yeah. But anyway, maybe that's just being
yeah,
ours.
I see what you're saying. I also think, like for me especially, sometimes it's different for me to consider and opine on these ideas and versus actually putting them into practice. Like that can be really hard. Um, especially when it comes to doing something I don't want to do. Like I get stubborn and, kind of want like put my foot down and just throw my hands up. And in some ways, I feel like that's how I was as a kid, and I have that inside of me, like that I have to actively work against. Um, but it's difficult, and interesting. We talked about like the American dream and sort of trying to provide for yourself and make a better life for your kids. And when I look at our dad, I see the same type of thing. Like he came from his family basically had nothing. Lived in poverty more or less, and he sort of made something of himself. Now you could attribute some amount of that to luck, or and I think that'd be accurate, but you also you don't give yourself a chance if you don't take a shot. So him, he became an airline pilot, and I think by the time he died, he was like the number 2 seniority pilot for U.S. Air and out of Washington, seniority captain or whatever. And that, like, you don't get there without a ton of hard work. Um, and so when I look at that and what he was able to accomplish, and the life he was able to provide, it's honestly quite kind of remarkable to me, kind of
Yeah,
what he rose out of, and I certainly admire him for that.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he took uh, opportunity and he made something of it. And there's in a lot of the qualities through which he was able to do that, he kind of instilled in us. So it was, to my own detriment that I kind of turned my back on those for a while. I had to learn the hard way. You can learn the easy way or you can learn the hard way.
Yeah.
I learned the hard way.
Yep. Sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's you know, it's obvious. I'm really interested in that what you said about sort of categorizing life before and after that event. I've really never thought of it that way. Um, but I think it probably applies to me as well. Such a fundamental shift in your life, an event like that. I do remember. I don't I don't know how old I was, but when our great grandmother died, I think I was probably like 12, maybe 11.
yeah, I remember that.
And to me,
Vaguely.
I remember thinking like this was the first encounter with death that I've ever had, and we didn't really know her that well, saw her very rarely, handful of times that I could ever even remember anyway. Um, and I remember being like in that 14, 15 year old range and thinking like, man, like I've never really experienced like death or loss of any meaningful kind. And there were some other people, whether at school or whatever, had like a grandparent die or somebody who they were closer to. And I remember having these thoughts like, man, like what would it feel like to lose somebody close? Like, what does that grief feel like? And then we got obviously overwhelmed with it because, well, obviously dad died, and then like a month later we lost an uncle, and a month after that we lost a grandfather. And then
Yeah,
it's like within a
real
three
quick.
month span, you lose 3 people that are pretty big players in your family circle. Um, yeah, just I mean, it's just crazy. Life is just so unpredictable. Um, Such a weird experience to have to go through. But yeah, I mean, I guess what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? I mean, it's definitely contributed to who I am as a person and how I view the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think something that keeps coming to mind is you said earlier, like life is suffering, right? And then like we talk about the value of hard work. Um, and I feel like a lot of maybe most of the time I think when I think of life as suffering, I'm like thinking of like you're just sitting there like hurting and you hate it and like it's overtaking you versus like like grinding through it, like it like you're suffering, it hurts, but you're persevering, you're pushing on. Maybe that's like a better take on it. Like like the suffering is part of it, but
Yeah.
you're like it's not stopping you, and maybe it's making you stronger in a way because you're enduring it and growing through it and better able to withstand that. And then you go and choose new goals, and then you have suffering as you're working towards those goals too. Maybe that's like the like productive way of looking at that process.
Yeah, you have to struggle through things. I've also heard it put that we underestimate our ability to cope with difficult situations. This actually, and this makes me think of there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was imprisoned in a concentration camp, and one of the central themes of the book is sort of that your whatever outside circumstances you find yourself in, you can always control your response, um, and that sort of relates to me to Dad in a way. I remember when for the senior year, yearbook. You pick like they had us pick like a quote or something. I don't know. I didn't know what to pick, but Dad had in his study, he had some postcard or something. He had all kind of stuff on the walls, and he had some quote that said, "Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you deal with it." And so I mean, I picked that
Yeah,
because I didn't know any. I mean, I don't know, but it's like such a salient point now, and it's so true. I mean, what you can control is your response, and being able to cope with difficult situations. And to Viktor Frankl's point in the book, like you can kind of you can still find happiness or joy even in the worst possible circumstances, and it's your response. It's how you deal with that. It's how you move forward. Um, and that's another one of those lessons that I can kick around that idea and dissect it and analyze it, but it doesn't make it any easier necessarily to put into practice. Um, but it's hard. It's hard, and I think it's true. And
yeah,
dealing with difficult things is a central part of life. And there's another way to put it: is you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
yeah,
So like branch, and whether that's physically or especially when you're trying to grow in a certain direction, maybe in a professional capacity or in a hobby or something, learning a new skill. You want to be outside of your comfort zone. You want to be uncomfortable, and kind of keeps you hungry in a way. Um,
yeah,
so I feel like I learned that from Dad quite a bit. I feel like those values ultimately come from kind of how we were brought up.
yeah. He was always learning stuff. I mean, to a fault, right? Like he didn't want to pay anyone to do anything. He wanted
Yeah,
to do it himself. He
yeah.
didn't have enough time to do everything himself.
There are certainly times to hire a professional, but
Yeah, that was something else that we learned from Dad.
yeah, those were few and far between for him, including doing your own septic repair.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. More than once too.
That's probably not something I want to do.
No.
Although there's certainly some merit there, and the spirit of that idea of sort of um, branching out and trying something new and giving it a shot, whether it be auto repair or doing something around the house, um, even certain kinds of construction jobs, putting up drywall or something like that. And it's easier than ever these days with YouTube and all the other resources you have at your fingertips to help you with that. But I think there's value in that in trying to overcome some obstacle that you have no idea sort of how it works. Um,
Definitely.
and that translates into any number of different areas of life, and I think again there's a direct link between that and how I approach modern day problems, whether it be at work or in my personal life or whatever. Uh, just getting in there and trying your best and seeing what happens. And sort of almost like let the cards fall where they may and then try to clean them up afterwards,
Yeah, yeah, you got to try. And there is a book I read a few years ago called, I think it was called Flow or something.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
I haven't read it, but I know what the book is. Yeah.
Yeah, where you're, it's getting into that state of flow, and what that is kind of is like riding that wave of struggling, to learn something new or to do something new or to achieve that goal, whatever it is. And then the point is like, and there's specific qualities of that state of being where like you kind of lose track of time. There's none of it's euphoria, but like you feel like a deep sense of meaning with what you're doing. Like
Yeah.
you're fully engaged, fully focused on it. And then once you accomplish that goal, the thing is to set a new goal. So you're like ratcheting higher goals, building upon goals, and that way you can continue, in that flow state and continuing to grow.
I think that's absolutely a necessary part of being a human.
Yeah.
You have to strive in some direction. This is you talked about learning lessons the hard way. I think this is a lesson I've learned the hard way. It's I used to say that reflecting upon this, I remember writing this in like a journal that I was keeping at a time. Like it's not enough to just exist. You have to live. You have
Yeah.
to pursue something. And in a way, it almost doesn't even matter what that something is, which is so strange. But having something to go after, and I think this is often cited as a problem in retirement for people. Is that they retire away from something and they have nothing to retire to, and so then they don't know what to do with themselves and they just sort of flounder. Because even if you dislike your job, it gives you a sense of structure and honestly a sense of meaning. Even if you don't like it, is that it's at least something to do and something. There are problems that need to be solved. Even if you're a janitor, you got to mop the floor, whatever it is. There are things you have to tackle. And I think having obstacles to overcome is such an integral part of being a human. And again, this is one of those where even now sometimes like I don't do enough of it. But it can be hard. It can be hard to have, I suppose, the motivation to want to do those things, because by its very definition, we're talking about struggling, and you don't necessarily want to get off the couch and go struggle.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily sound like a good time.
Yeah, that's where the self-discipline comes in.
Yeah. So there's this other concept. I haven't read this book, but I've heard it referenced a lot, and I've looked into the ideas are interesting. There's a book called Start. The whole point is that you got to start doing something. So it's not about motivation, and too often, you can get caught in this sort of analysis paralysis is the phrase that's used, where you want to make sure everything is perfect before you do anything. Even something like this podcast idea of, I at least have a tendency to want to try to look at every angle of it and consider exactly what we're going to do and talk about and time structure and everything like that. But there's inherent value in just starting.
Right.
Just sort of getting your butt off the couch type of thing and getting going. And there's value in that, and there's value in struggling through something. So, but yeah, I think all of that comes back in a real way to Dad.
Yeah. Yeah. To kind of shift gears a little bit, I watched, I forget the name of it, but it's a documentary on SpaceX. It's on Netflix. watched that last night.
Hmm.
And one of the contrasts that it kind of showed was prior to commercial space development, like commercial companies like SpaceX, there were the large kind of institutional actors that had like long-standing contracts with NASA, such as like Boeing. And it sounded like maybe from like a software develop mindset, traditionally they were following the waterfall approach, where like lots of analysis up front before you do anything.
Right.
And then SpaceX came in with more of like an agile approach, where like you just start doing stuff, you fail fast, you learn, then you iterate, and you figure it out. Um,
Yeah.
so that's and you make progress rapidly that way. I mean, they're already launching rockets and people into space and everything, and then those other guys are still like trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I love
but,
the fail faster axiom. Um,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, there's so many parallels again between like software engineering and life, but I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. It's even if you utterly fail, you sort of take something away from it. You've at least made mistakes, or there's something to learn from, or um, you've enhanced your skills in some way, or you at least know what doesn't work. Um, I think it's a great way to approach life in general. Um,
yeah,
just to get in there and get your hands dirty. And I tell my boss sometimes, like when I do reviews, like the way I learn best, honestly, is like you throw me in the deep end. Like let me
right,
flounder around in that pool, and maybe I drowned. Maybe you got to come in and save me. But sometimes I'm gonna be able to swim to the edge, and
yeah,
maybe do a backflip off the diving board or something. And you just never know until you're put in that position.
yeah, yeah. There's value to hitting the ground running, just figuring it out,
Yeah.
which is why it's interesting, because Dad was like that. He tried a lot of stuff. He learned from mistakes, and then somehow he just eventually got into a place where it overwhelmed him. I was like, what changed? Maybe it was just too much coming at him at once.
I sort of wonder if, all the things that he did, I think when, at the time that he died, I believe the count was 22 motorcycles, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly. I mean, like, it's just absurd. It's just ridiculous. Most of them probably didn't work, but I think he probably surrounded himself with things and interests to try to distract himself, try to keep himself busy, try to give himself some sort of reprieve from whatever was going on, in his head. Um, and I think, working on a car engine or something granted him some measure of comfort. Um, and that's why he always wanted to do it. And even though sometimes it failed, in some cases dramatically, like the one time when he had a rag in front of an open engine, and the engine sucked the rag into the gears, into the camshaft, I think. And he came out and showed me, and I mean, that's basically destroyed that part of the engine until he had to take it all apart and clean it all out. You can, I mean, it's obviously a ridiculous failure, but it's almost, I think he almost enjoyed the failures, like because now there's almost a new challenge. Well, I got to clean up that kind of mess that I just made. And I think those kind of distractions, in whatever small way, contributed to him trying to find meaning in his own life,
yeah,
and like I said, trying to distract his brain from the pain that he was dealing with.
yeah, yeah. Maybe that was his flow state, right? Like figuring out how to fix whatever it was he was fixing, or building or whatever. But yeah, and maybe it just became too much, where he had so many different projects, and everything was half done.
Right.
So like, which direction do you turn when you have everything half done? You want to make progress on something. Your energy is getting dispersed too much. So,
Yeah, that's another actually piece of advice I've seen frequently in the software community, which is like if you're doing small personal projects, it's very easy to just abandon them
Right.
because like maybe you have an idea and you build a prototype and then you encounter some difficulty and then you want to get on some other idea, and there's value in kind of disciplining yourself to completing it in whatever fashion, whatever that means, so that you can sort of start to train yourself to complete things, which is like a whole separate skill set,
Right.
um, which is interesting. I don't know if Dad ever really got there, but yeah, he certainly had a lot of in-flight projects all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. That could be a stressor too. Um, well, brother, it's been fun. I think I'm gonna have to go soon because I gotta pee.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, this was great. This is great conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll have lots of stuff to talk about next time too.
Okay. Yeah, good. Well, thanks for joining me on it, and we'll catch up next time.
Sounds good. All right.
All right. Bye.
See ya.